I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The main federal party leaders continued their election campaigning today. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau began his day with a freshwater announcement in Granby, Quebec, before heading north to Nunavut for stops in Iqaluit. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh crossed the country, starting off in Ottawa and then flying to Ladysmith, BC. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was in the Toronto area with a campaign stop at a dog sanctuary in King City and an event with supporters in Markham. Well, meanwhile, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau's campaign ran into more profanity-spewing protesters on Sunday. After Friday's Liberal rally in Bolton, Ontario was cancelled over crowd security concerns, Sunday's event in Cambridge saw Liberal campaign buses blocked by an angry crowd. Some shouted death threats, while one man yelled racist and misogynistic insults to Mr. Trudeau's security detail. Mr. Trudeau says he understands the fear and anxiety many are feeling amid a rapidly changing world, a pandemic, and a tough year, but he will keep moving Canada forward. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh have both condemned the angry crowds and called on people to be respectful. Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner is suggesting legislation may be necessary to enhance the ability to prosecute criminal harassment. In the past 2 weeks, Rempel-Garner says she's been chased down the street by 2 different men with cameras demanding her response to, quote, conspiracy theories. She also says she received a death threat from someone who called her office. On Friday night, she said she and her husband were accosted by a large man while dining at a restaurant. Toronto police are looking for a suspect following a shooting that sent YORKDALE shopping centre into lockdown yesterday afternoon. One suspect is already in custody, who allegedly was found with a loaded firearm after running away from police. Police say nobody was injured in the shooting. Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau says the federal government is not giving up on the Canadians and vulnerable Afghan citizens still stuck in Afghanistan after Canada ended its air rescue mission.
Unfortunately, the closure of the air bridge forced us to end our evacuation operations earlier than we would have wanted to. Despite our best efforts, there are many Canadians and vulnerable Afghans who supported Canada's efforts who remain in Afghanistan. This is heart-wrenching given the security situation on the ground. Let me be clear. We will not stop looking for other paths to bring these people home.
He's urging people hiding in Kabul to stay in place as Canada watches how things evolve in the coming days. Well, meanwhile, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization is meeting this week to discuss whether COVID-19 vaccine booster shots should be offered to people with compromised immune systems. Ontario has already begun to offer boosters to transplant recipients, people with some blood cancers, and long-term care home residents. NACI is also recommending kids between 12 and 17 get both doses of either Pfizer or Moderna. Health Canada announced yesterday it has approved Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for children as young as 12. The union representing RCMP officers says it's concerned by BC Premier John Horgan's suggestion that businesses should call police for help with enforcing vaccine card rules. The National Police Federation says its members will always respond professionally to businesses and individuals in need of support. However, the union says police are being called to do more without additional resources or funding, and they're already stretched thin. Brian Pallister says he will step down as Premier of Manitoba on Wednesday. The Progressive Conservative Party has scheduled a leadership vote for October 30th. Mr. Pallister says he is leaving the Premier's office sooner than planned to avoid any perception that he is influencing the leadership race. The Tory caucus is to appoint an interim leader this week. Mr. Pallister has been Premier since 2016. An independent report revealed Indigenous students are disproportionately held back and diverted from the typical graduation path in one BC school district. The report shows there is a lack of trust between the Prince George Board of Education and many Indigenous stakeholders. It also found that the school bus schedules also prevent many Indigenous students from participating in after-school programs or attending French immersion or other specialized schools. A researcher says there are more to wildfires than destruction by burning. There's also a chemical fallout as well. The flames can leave behind a trail of toxic metal. UBC professor Michael Brower says some of the hazardous materials found in ash and soil after a wildfire include asbestos, arsenic, lead, and mercury. Most of the metals come from household items such as paint, treated wood, thermometers, cars, and electronic goods. All right, stay with us. When we come back, we'll take a look at an interview we did with a Ukrainian soldier involved in the rescue of Canada-bound Afghans. Stay with us. A group of Afghan interpreters and their families are Canada-bound after a bold rescue by Ukrainian soldiers. The rescue effort was organized by the Ukrainian military, President Vladimir Zelensky's office, and the Globe and Mail. The group of 19 Afghans included a translator who worked for the Globe, along with another who worked with the Canadian Armed Forces. According to the Globe and Mail, Ukrainian special forces went out on foot into the city of Kabul to rescue the group of 19 Afghans. President Vladimir Zelensky hailed the operation, while the foreign minister says that Ukraine would be happy to provide further support to Canada. With us today is an officer who personally participated in the rescue operation. Oleg is an officer of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. His face and family name are being withheld due to security concerns. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily, and thank you for your efforts in Afghanistan.
Hello, thank you for giving a floor for me.
And can you walk us through this operation, Oleg, and how it was organized?
To this end, the Ukrainian evacuation mission was conducted in 2 stages. In addition to the citizens of Ukraine, the evacuees include UN representatives, members of human rights organizations, employees of Global Mail, USA Today, Washington Post, Stars and Stripes, and others, as well as people who cooperated with the coalition contingent. The rescue operation was carried out by the staff of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Ministry of Internal Affairs, with the assistance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with the support of the Office of the President of Ukraine. And during the operation, there were issues that required contact with the leaderships and official services of other countries, which is why the coordination center worked around the clock throughout the evacuation. And in order to find the safety, pick up people from the evacuation, Special Operation Forces unit of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine walked outside the protected perimeter of the airport. None of the other evacuation missions dared to make such a risky decision, as the area outside the airport was already under control of Taliban militants. However, this approach allowed to find and pick up the maximum possible numbers of people agreed to the evacuation in this short period of time.
Now, Oleg, this mission happened just hours after the suicide attack at the airport. So can you give us a picture of the landscape you had to navigate for this mission?
After the suicide bomber blew up the entrance to Abbey Gate, any contact with the territory behind the controlled perimeter was very dangerous because the intelligence of the coalition forces constantly reported that the threat of a new terrorist act. And by the way, it's unclear who and how the Russian Federation evacuated because they were not seen at the airport and were never met in the city. And our troops were on the place of the attack the hour before.
And how did navigating the landscape on foot work for the Ukrainian military's benefit? We know other attempts to get Afghan translators to certain meeting points at the airport had failed.
Anyway, I think the success is because of the training, and we know how to navigate the city even if you don't know the language. But it's lucky for us that lots of people know English, so you can ask and know the way of moving.
All right, Oleg, we've just got about a minute and a half left here, but can you tell us about the overall condition of the 19 Afghans who were rescued and how they reacted to the mission, their overall sentiment?
Okay, all evacuated citizens underwent personal control and verification of documents, medical, social, and psychological assistance, as well as water and food were provided to all evacuees of the territory of the territory base where defense intelligence officers were stationed. Despite the fact that Ukraine did not have its own peacekeeping continent in Afghanistan, it managed to achieve the strategic result. Ukraine ranked the 7th place of the number of evacuees among the European countries. More than 700 people were evacuated.
All right, just about 45 seconds left here, but Canada and the Ukraine share a long history, which includes the Canadian Armed Forces assisting to train Ukrainian troops. What is the message Ukraine is sending to Canada through this rescue?
Okay, I don't know how if it can be called a signal, but if so, it's a clear signal that Ukraine is a reliable partner who is ready to help to despite the danger in any part of the world. And I, as a military man, don't understand why there is any doubts about the membership in NATO in the world community. It is the act of the servicemen and men who do not stay away when civilians are in trouble. So since the beginning of the aggression against Ukraine, Canada has expressed its constant support for sovereignty and territorial integrity of our state. And taking this opportunity, I would like to sincerely thank you for your country for helping Ukraine at a difficult time for our country.
One of the biggest sale weekends of the year is fast approaching. Labor Day weekend is traditionally filled with retail discounts ahead of the federal holiday. But this year, Labor Day sales will be happening in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, inflation, and supply chain disruptions. That combination could lead to less than impressive discounts. Meanwhile, supply chain disruptions can be seen in multiple sectors. Canadian tech companies predict it will be months at least until their supply chain processes are back to normal. And they warn that it would take even longer to make up for lost profits and elevated costs from a string of recent issues. Well, joining us now to talk more on the supply chain disruptions during the pandemic is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, always great having you on Forum Daily. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Great to be here.
So why are we having a shortage in certain products, Brendan?
Well, the supply chain, the ability for products to get delivered from where they're made to where they're needed has been really fundamentally disrupted, not just from COVID, but trade wars between the US and China. See, going back however long you want to go, products used to be made locally. I mean, most Canadian towns had a piano manufacturer. Now there are 2 piano manufacturers on the face of the earth. There were all kinds of little car companies. Now there's only a handful of car companies on the face of the earth. So things were made locally, then they were made nationally. Now they're made transnationally. And that interconnectedness, the globalization which you and I have grown up with has been increasingly a part of how goods get from where they're made to where they're wanted. And that has been really turned upside down by not just COVID, although COVID's been a big part of it, but increased demand and the ability, the actual physical ability to get from one place to the other. That's been it's been a real challenge.
And how has the pandemic itself impacted supply chains within Canada, Brendan?
Well, it's not so much within Canada, although the barriers between provincial borders is another thing for another conversation. It's more overseas to Canada, particularly coming from Asia. COVID has disrupted China in a major way, which has a pretty much zero tolerance policy for COVID. And notwithstanding that's where the virus originally came from, one single case in a major port is enough to have it shut down for weeks. And given how much has come from China, not just computer chips, not just running shoes, but everything has got some part coming from there. That's what's really disrupted it. And what that means is a container that would have contained Chinese running shoes or computer chips or whatever is now not available in Iowa to load soybeans, so that soybean shipment doesn't make it to Indonesia, so that there isn't the animal feed available. So everything is interconnected, and when one part of the chain breaks, the whole thing is, if not falling apart, at least disrupted very badly.
All right, Brendan, just about 2 minutes left here, but what kind of products have been impacted due to supply shortages right now?
Well, the single biggest one has been computer chips, because we think of computer chips, and it's not just the really high-end chips that do brilliant graphic design. For enough money, those very few really high-end chips can always get from one place to another. But so much of our world is now computerized. A 1957 Chev didn't have any computer chips in it. Indeed, the first mission to the moon didn't have computer chips, it had transistors. So flash forward to the present, your car now has lots of computer chips to run everything, the brakes, the air conditioning, everything. So the big car companies in the US have been stockpiling their cars, which look ready, except there's no brakes because there's no chip to run them. So that would be the biggest thing. And that's been caused partly by COVID, partly by the cryptocurrency. The demand for computer chips, particularly graphics processing units, GPUs, has been tremendous. So that's going to need to get it sorted out.
That's very interesting, Brendan. Now, is this a permanent issue, or do you see supply chains picking back up soon?
I think we need to think about it in permanent terms and think about how our world interacts. If there was a single book to read that is but is not about this subject, it's called The Long Summer by Brian Fagan. And it's about how, as societies get bigger and more complex and more interdependent, they're able to withstand bigger and bigger climactic shifts. And what we've seen, though, is that over the millennia, as bigger and bigger shocks hit those interconnected economies, they're more susceptible to falling apart. And what I think we need to pay attention to as a society, as a civilization, is how our interconnectedness is not just related to computer chips and running shoes, but fundamental resources like food. I think it's going to be an ongoing issue for a long time that we're going to have to, in a considerate, non-combative way, if we're going to get through this, work on it as a society together.
A senior UN official warns that food in Afghanistan could run out this month. That threatens to add a hunger crisis to the challenges facing the country's new Taliban rulers. Nearly 1/3 of the country's population of 38 million is facing emergency or crisis levels of food insecurity. Authorities say at least 14 deaths were reported in New York City and New Jersey as relentless rain from the remnants of Hurricane Ida sent the area into a state of emergency. The storm swept into New England and is continuing into Atlantic Canada. Subway stations and tracks became so flooded that the Metropolitan Transportation Authority suspended all service. Videos posted online showed subway riders standing on seats in cars filled with water. Indian authorities have cracked down on public movement and imposed a near-total communications blackout in the Kashmir region. This comes after the death of Saeed Ali Gilani, a top Kashmir separatist leader. Mr. Gilani died late Wednesday at the age of 92. His son, Naseem Gilani, told the Associated Press that authorities quietly buried his father under harsh restrictions. He says they would not allow his burial at the main martyrs' graveyard in Srinagar. The Press Trust of India reported that officials disallowed any mass funeral in anticipation of anti-India protests. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has delivered his third State of the Nation address. He highlighted his campaign against government corruption and downplaying the work that remains to be done in the areas of security and reducing poverty. Nearly midway through his 6-year term, Mr. López Obrador remains popular. This despite stubbornly high levels of violence and rising inflation in an economy coming out of recession. Chinese regulators have ordered ride-hailing platforms to correct unfair market tactics. This comes amid a crackdown on the internet sector that has spooked investors and shaved billions off the valuations of some of China's biggest technology companies. 11 platforms were ordered by year's end to stop unfair competition tactics and practices, such as recruiting unlicensed drivers. Japan opened its new digital agency on Wednesday. Japan's reliance on paperwork and fax data delayed financial subsidies and support for people during the pandemic, and it slowed the sharing of medical data about COVID-19 patients and vaccinations. It also hampered schools when they switched to online learning. The new agency has about 600 workers and aims to digitize administrative procedures in 31 areas and standardize systems used by municipalities within 5 years. Amazon is going on a major hiring spree with plans to add 55,000 new employee roles. About 40,000 of those jobs will be in the U.S. While other companies laid off workers during the pandemic, Amazon's workforce ballooned. This was due to increased demand from the shopping site. Amazon hired 500,000 people last year and currently employs more than 1.3 million worldwide. OPEC and its allies are adding more oil back to the market as demand recovers from the worst of the coronavirus pandemic. The oil-producing cartel and its allies agreed to add back 400,000 barrels of oil per day from October 1st. The group, known as OPEC Plus, is restoring deep cuts made last year. Lockdowns and travel restrictions caused fuel demand and prices to crater. The international team investigating the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine 7 years ago is appealing to Russians for information. They are asking Russians in the city of Kursk to come forward with information about the deployment of the missile that investigators say downed the plane. It killed all 298 people on board. Fighting has flared up between Yemen's pro-government forces and Houthi rebels in the oil-rich government stronghold of Marib province. At least 28 fighters were killed over the last 24 hours. Security officials from both sides and tribal leaders say that most of the fatalities were among the Iran-backed rebels assaulting the city of Rabah. They spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to brief the media. Police in northwestern Nigeria say gunmen have attacked another remote school, kidnapping 73 students. Wednesday's attack prompted authorities to close all primary and secondary schools across Zamfara state. The latest abductions come just days after Nigerians celebrated the release of 3 different groups of young hostages. More than 1,000 students have been kidnapped from schools in northern Nigeria since December. An international effort is underway to rescue members of Afghanistan's girls' national soccer team and their families over fears of reprisal by the Taliban. The effort, known as Operation Soccer Balls, suffered a setback last week after a suicide bombing at the airport in Kabul. The concern is that the girls will likely be in danger because they participated in athletics, which is banned by the Taliban. There have been at least 5 failed attempts to rescue the girls in recent days. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News, your week in review. We'll see you next time.